All right, Charlie, I have 11:02. Do you want to go ahead and get started?
Sure.
All
Let's
right, give
do
me a
it, Ted.
second, and I will turn the screen over to you. And it is all yours. The floor is yours, Charlie. Get us started.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody, for coming today. There's a few things before we get to our featured speakers today, and I just want to just as a matter of, what do you call that? Housekeeping. There are a few things coming up that you should make note and put on your calendar. Our awards are coming along swimmingly, right, David? I'm looking for a nod of confirmation. Yes, awards are coming along swimmingly. In fact, the last day for judging is going to be coming up on the 19th. And then after that, it's just come and get them and pat yourself on the back. That will be September the 23rd. It's out at the Sauer Building. We hope that you will come. This will be in person. It's not going to be a virtual thing like most of the world is, but we're slowly coming back around, Delta variant permitting. The Virginia Moore, and we all know Virginia from the governor's press conferences, has agreed to be our communicator of the year. So if you've never met Virginia, she's kind of a hero of mine and a lot of communicators. She will be there that day and to accept her award. Also coming up in the fall is our fall conference. That's also going to be in person. Looking forward to that. Shaker Village. We've been wanting to get back to Shaker Village for a little while, but the pandemic put the brakes on that. You know Nancy Cox, the anchor from Channel 18 in Lexington. She has agreed to be there, share her opinions and thoughts on news as it's been with so much in government, from civil unrest to the pandemic, elections, you name it. So it'll be interesting to hear what she has to say. It will be a full day out at Shaker Village. You might circle, was it Friday, the 15th of October? We hope you can come. Information will be coming out pretty soon on how you can sign up and the fees involved. It will be a full day there at Shaker Village. And part of the day is going to be spent on the Bonnie Bell. Hear the history of the place. Oh, and don't forget fantastic food and cornbread. I love that. Lastly, if you would like to be a part of our organization beyond just being a member, we have our elections coming up. I'm thinking that, November or so, we have several people on the board that may decide they'd like to stay with us. We never know. Vice President, the administrative vice president, we don't have. So if you want to be president next year, that would be a good time to get your name on the ballot for this year. Our VP of programs, David Davis, your term is coming up. You can hope you can stay, but if you don't, that would be an option for somebody else to put their name in the hat. If you would like to be a secretary, take notes. That would be a good opportunity. And lastly, just a board of directors, just a director's position is open, so you help with a lot of things. So there are 4 options. So if you would like, be thinking of that. We want people with skills, that would be from MailChimp to web design to whatever it may be, or event organization. You just want to get out there and make this a better place to be a communicator. We want you. So be thinking of that. David, that's what I have, and I can't wait to hear more about Sadie, and I'm going to pronounce it Spandana. Correct? Thumb up.
So close.
Wrong.
It's Spandana.
What is it?
Spandana.
Spandana.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlie. I do want to follow up a couple of things. So Charlie mentioned the award ceremony. That is invitation only. Doesn't mean you can't come, but if you don't actually see an invitation from me by, say, the middle of August, email me. That is going to be a free event, but registration is going to be required because we are buying lunch for everyone that attends. And then Charlie didn't mention it, but there will obviously be registration for the fall conference. There will be a cost to that, and we'll have that information up, and I'll send out emails on that as we get closer. So thank you, Charlie. So today we are blessed to have a couple of nice young students from the area with us today. They are with the Kentucky Student Voice team. The first one is Sadie Bograd, and that name may sound familiar because she's the 2021 KAGC Scholarship Award winner. This is the third year in a row we've done the scholarship, so congratulations to Sadie. Sadie's a first-year student at Yale, or will be shortly. Have you left, Sadie, for there yet?
Nope, I'm here till August.
Until August, excellent. So she's a graduate of Paul Laurence Dunbar High School in Lexington. She's been a member of the Kentucky Student Voice team for over 6 years and has served as editor-in-chief of KSVT's blog, the Student Voice Forum. And then she's going to be joined by, man, I've already forgot it, Spandana. And I'm going to let her introduce herself in a minute and give you her last name because that one looks just as hard. She is a junior at DuPont Manual High School in Louisville, Kentucky. She's also a member of the Kentucky Student Voice team, or leadership team, and helps direct their research. So I am going to turn the screen over to you, Sadie. Before you put your PowerPoint up, why don't you just say a couple of words, and then let Spandana say a couple words as well, and then you guys can continue with your PowerPoint. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you all so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and of course, extremely appreciative of the scholarship that you all gave me. I think you got a pretty good introduction to me. As Mr. Davis said, I am a rising first year at Yale, just graduated from high school in Fayette County, and I'm excited to share a little bit more about the Kentucky Student Voice team and our communications work. And with that, I'll pass it off to Spandana.
Yeah, so my last name is pronounced Pavuluri, and I, like you said, I'll be a junior at DuPont Manual High School. I joined the Kentucky Student Voice team in May of 2020, so like right when schools were closing and everything like that. And so I really got involved with the research project we had going at the time called Coping with COVID Student-to-Student Study. And so that was my first dabble with KSVT and research, and then I've just kind of continued from there, and I'm really excited to be here and speak with you guys today.
Great. And with that, let me see if I can share my screen. Sorry, I just got a new laptop yesterday, and it is struggling a little bit. Okay, we'll see if that works. Okay, can you all see that?
Yep.
Perfect. Sorry for the delay.
No problem, you're good.
As you can see here, we are the Kentucky Student Voice team, and our goal today is just to talk a little bit about our work, the importance of student voice, and sort of our student perspective on communications. As we'll discuss later, we've done a lot of different communications-related things, from running our own blog and podcast to engaging in lots of legislative and research campaigns that required a strong communications focus. And we're excited to dive into that in a little bit more detail. But first, just to give you a bit more information about who we are and what our team does. The Kentucky Student Voice team is a statewide group of students ranging from middle to high school and up through college. We include over 100 members from practically every county in the state, and we are a group of self-selected students. So we are unaffiliated with any school. No one is appointed or selected to join the organization. It's truly just a bunch of students who care deeply about student voice, ensuring that students have a role in their education and in education decision-making, and who want to make a difference in their schools, their districts, and their state. And I should just note that we've been around for 8 years. We were established in 2013 as part of the Pritchard Committee for Academic Excellence, but we very recently spun off into our own youth-led independent organization and are now getting to experience all the joys of running our own nonprofit and filing for nonprofit status. So at our core, we at the Student Voice team believe that students bring enormous added value to our schools. And with that in mind, we strive to amplify and elevate student voice. We believe that alongside teachers, the students who are at the front lines of the classrooms are in the best positions to make schools better. So we believe that students know what's going wrong in schools, that they know what needs to be done to help make things right, and that they should have a voice in improving Kentucky schools.
Yeah, and so really at the heart of what we do is listen to other students. We know that we consist of only around 100 or so young people, and because we do tend to draw students who are more successful in school or more high achieving, we know that our members themselves really don't represent the entire Kentucky student experience, and that actually hits on exactly why communications is so important within the KSVT, because our core strategy is really to reach out to other students from all backgrounds in the form of student-to-student interviews, roundtable discussions, like the one that you see on the screen right now. And so this kind of means talking to the handful of minority students about race in a mostly white rural school. Or it means visiting students at the Kentucky School for the Deaf and talking to those students using sign language interpreters. And it also means listening to students who are homeless describe what it is like to do well in school when they're worried about where they're going to sleep each night or where their next meal will come from. And that means that we are very serious about amplifying and elevating the voices of students who are the least heard in our schools and who don't have a seat at the table. And so now with that, what do we do with the stories and the voices that we collect? So we share them across numerous platforms, from social media and blogging to op-eds and policy reports. And Sadie will actually touch on that when she talks about the forum, because that's a big way we share back. And we also do workshops and presentations in Kentucky and all across the country. And so to give you a bit of a better idea, since we started around 8 years ago, our crew of primarily teenagers has been responsible for over 65 published newspaper columns, over 175 local and national presentations, 13 policy research reports, 3 statewide Capitol rallies, changes to 3 state laws, a blog forum, a podcast, a book, and actually, as of just a few weeks ago, 1 amicus brief filed with the U.S. Supreme Court. And now, as we move on to this next slide that deals with meaningful student voice, we really think this is one of the best illustrations of how student voice can look very different to people depending on what they know about its possibilities and potential. So we distinguish meaningful student voice from less meaningful student voice, which is more like students serving in superficial roles or as visual aids to a more predetermined agenda. And so the power of student voice ranges from students simply talking about their perspectives or serving as sources of information in the forms of things like holding signs in a protest or filling out an adult-created survey, all the way to students co-designing activities as partners with adults or leading their own change efforts. Kind of what you guys are all doing today by supporting some high school students to teach you what we know about student voice. And we really love to put this visual in all of our presentations just because we think it's a really laid out way to express student voice. So definitely we can send this over to you afterwards as well. And I'll pass it to Sadie to talk about the forum now.
Great, thank you, Spandana. So now that you have a bit of an introduction to the Kentucky Student Voice team and what it is that we do, we wanted to dive a little bit more deeply into a few different aspects of our work and what they've taught us about communications. So we wanted to start off with the Student Voice Forum, which is probably the first element of the team that I got involved in way back when I was in middle school, and that I was fortunate enough to help lead over the past few years as the editor-in-chief of our editorial board. So we like to think of our blog, the Student Voice Forum, as a great way for students who don't have access to traditional media and publications to have their voices heard. Generally speaking, blogging is uniquely accessible for most people. We host our website, the Student Voice Forum, on the blogging platform Medium, and anyone, regardless of age or background, can start a Medium blog. There's a very low barrier to entry. Now, in some ways, the Student Voice Forum functions as part of sort of the media arm of the Kentucky Student Voice team. So we occasionally publish transcripts of our testimonies that we've delivered to groups like the Kentucky Board of Education and various legislative bodies. Sometimes we publish transcripts of roundtables, like, for example, on the left here, you can see a recent forum post that we published about grading, which, as you can see, Spandana herself was included in. But for the most part, the Student Voice Forum is really a unique independent publication in and of itself, where students share the stories that they want to share and that they might not have had an opportunity to share elsewhere. So first, we've already touched on this a little bit, but I just want to talk a bit about why it's so important that students are able to have their voices heard, particularly through the medium of writing and blogging. So we think that it is inherent in sort of the ethos of student voice that it's important to have your voice heard and respected, especially if it's been marginalized in other areas. We think that storytelling is a really powerful experience, not just for the reader who gets to learn about new experiences and become familiar with new education-related issues, but we think it's also important for the author who gets to sort of claim their story, find some acceptance, and maybe become a little bit more confident in speaking about their experiences. But now I want to spend the bulk of the time here focusing on sort of how we've tried to make an accessible forum for students to publish their writing and get some familiarity with communications. And there are three sort of key tenets that we keep in mind in order to do that. The first thing that I want to talk about is accessibility. So our focus is really on making sure that as many students as possible can write for the forum as they want to. This means that we focus more on uplifting individual stories over standardizing things. So unlike the publications that you all are probably familiar with, we do not have a style guide. We do not have a specific formal standardized tone or format. And in fact, people write in all ranges of formats, from personal narratives to reported pieces to op-eds to more academic style papers. We also don't have a formal submission process. We have a very low-key, non-hierarchical editorial board. Most of the time for the past few years, people would write a story by simply sending me a DM or a text message and saying, hey, I have something I want to write. How can I go about doing that? And while that may not be the best strategy for a formal publication that needs to stick to a strict publishing schedule and that also needs to handle large amounts of money, as a fairly low-key forum for students to publish their writing, we think this accessible approach has really been key because it's meant that more students who maybe aren't familiar with the formal submission process, who don't know how to reach out to an editor, get a chance to write a story in a very low-key, congenial environment that helps them feel supported throughout the process. And then in tandem with that, we really focus on outreach. So we try to reach out to the students with stories of marginalization. We actively ask them to share their stories. So for example, over the past few years, we've published stories about transgender students who have been denied the access to the bathroom that matched their gender identity. We've published narratives by the only Muslim student in a rural Eastern Kentucky school. Generally speaking, we think that it's powerful to be asked to tell your story when it has been silenced before. And so we try to intentionally reach out to those students who we think might need a little bit more support and a little bit more of an opportunity in order to share what they've been through. And then we also engage in more formal instruction for students with less experience with writing and communications. So last year, we ran our first ever JCPS Justice Journalism workshop, in which we taught a handful of Louisville students about the basics of student voice, education justice, and journalism. And over the course of 6 weeks, all of these students identified an education justice related topic that they were interested in, interviewed members of their community, learned to conduct some basic research, and then wrote published pieces that were published on the Student Voice Forum, as you can see here in the middle with this article about why schools need a diverse teaching staff. So this workshop was really intended for students who were interested in writing and communications, but weren't necessarily as familiar with the process. We wanted to help them tell their stories and explore their issues, combining personal narratives with in-depth research and analysis. So one thing we often talk about at the Student Voice team is this idea of the head and the heart, combining facts and statistics, the head, with personal narratives and stories that really connect to people's emotions, the heart. And we thought that this workshop really exemplified that approach by teaching students to both embrace the power of their own stories, while also conducting the research and interviews necessary to craft a really compelling argument. And then finally, I want to talk about how we've expanded our reach. So as a relatively small publication, we've been really pleased to get hundreds or even thousands of reads on some of our stories, but we also know that we have a pretty limited reach on our own. And we think it's important that student voices are represented on a larger stage in all areas. So we actively seek out and develop partnerships with larger organizations. We've worked with education-related publications like the Hechinger Report and the 74 Million. We've worked with regional publications like the Rural Assembly. And even as you can see on the right, we've partnered with national groups like the Aspen Institute with their focus on climate education. So as established communications professionals, you all are probably already familiar with this process of reaching out to journalists and press contacts, but for a group of high school students, it's been a really empowering experience to get to work with other adults in the journalism industry who care deeply about uplifting student stories and who believe that it's important that students get to share their own voices, that they aren't marginalized or tokenized, but that their perspectives are actually really deeply valued. So I could say a whole bunch more about the Student Voice Forum, but I want to make sure that we have time for the rest of our presentation. So I'll just close by saying that if you want to read any of our stories or learn more, you can always go to studentvoiceforum.org. And with that, I'll pass it off to Spandana to talk about some other elements of our work.
Yeah, thank you, Sadie. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about our Save Our Seats campaign. And Sadie and I didn't get to be super involved with this, but we thought it was just a super important example to share with you all today. And so basically, this all kind of started 2021, and some of you may have been following it already, but the craziness really began in late March when we learned the night before a Senate Education Committee meeting that a committee substitute bill was going to be introduced to remove the non-voting student and teacher representatives from the Kentucky Board of Education. And the student representative on the BOE also happened to be a member of our team. And so within minutes, the Kentucky Student Voice team got to work. We set up a virtual war room and designed the hashtag Save Our Seats campaign throughout the night. And so by morning, our crew had developed a full-blown media campaign complete with press kit that they were ready to deploy the moment the bill was introduced, while most of us were even in school the next day. And so really, long story short, as soon as the amendment to remove the student and teacher reps from the Board of Education were introduced, one of our members broke the story in the Dunbar High School student newspaper. The team then launched a petition to gather hundreds of signatures and testimonials. We had quiet conversations with a number of legislators. We ran op-eds across the state and acted a coalition with various teacher groups and other youth-led organizations to really bring widespread attention to the move. And so the substitution bill was ultimately removed by the conference committee when the House overwhelmingly rejected the change. And the student and teacher seats were enshrined in law by the end of the session. This was such a critical moment for student representation in school governance in Kentucky. And, really at this point, it should not be surprising that Kentucky students ourselves spearheaded this effort. And so just to talk a little bit about communications, and Sadie, if you want to add anything in after, that's totally, you're good to do that. But communication was really, really vital throughout this work. With that virtual war room that I described, it was necessary to kind of be on top of things, be messaging each other, and our Slack, which is what we primarily use for communication in the KSVT, was blowing up that day. And then really the collection of stories and ideas and opinions of students regarding this movement and this bill was super important to collect. And so we had various students working on reaching out to other students or writing op-eds or doing all that type of work because we felt it was super necessary that students' voices were authentically captured. And then we also had to work closely, like I said just a minute ago, with organizations and really figure out how to facilitate these partnerships and how we could, fight this together. And so also thinking about how we present ourselves, we had to think really closely about how exactly we wanted to frame our responses to represent our group. And so it meant that while we were communicating, we really had to preserve student voice and make sure that student voice was legitimized, because oftentimes in education decision making, students aren't taken seriously enough. And then just to kind of bounce off this little example that kind of came to mind when I think of the Save Our Seats campaign, we've really tried to emphasize students getting more involved in, political and legislative matters, especially ones regarding their education. And so also students from our group led town halls with their school board candidates and led discussions and roundtable discussions, had people throughout the community come and basically were able to ask those representatives and those candidates what they were going to be doing for students who really are their primary stakeholders and who go to school for like 35 hours a week. And so, Sadie, is there anything you want to add on there before I move on to coping with COVID?
No, I think you did a really great job. I'll just say, I think as Spandana sort of alluded to, this was really an example of the student perspective on communications and maybe some of the unique aspects of our work really interfacing with established media organizations insofar as a team of mostly high school students, we were very willing to work very quickly, stay up till 2 or 3 a.m. crafting this complete press kit and media campaign. And at the same time, it was really an education in both how quickly the news cycle moves, how quickly the legislative process moves, and how we needed to interact with other, not only youth-led, but teacher-led groups around the state in order to really mobilize a campaign very quickly. But yeah, I think that was a really great explanation, Spandana.
Thank you, Sadie. And now I'll move on to our kind of last little example here. So this is that student-to-student study that I talked about a couple minutes ago when I was introducing myself. But this is one of our very recent examples of how we unleash student voice during the pandemic. And so really after Kentucky schools shut down for COVID-19, we decided that Kentucky students were facing unprecedented challenges learning from home, and we needed to figure out a way to capture and share back what students were experiencing to help shape education decision making. And so in that time, we created a massive research study. And, this truly was a very big deal. We had over 10,000 students from nearly every one of Kentucky's 119 counties responding to our Coping with COVID student-to-student survey. And this was an absolutely incredible number and really did surprise many adults in the research community. And we saw it really as a testament to how much Kentucky students want to be heard on issues surrounding schooling during the pandemic. And so among several of our key findings, we had Kentucky students experience significant emotional changes, largely negative during the pandemic, and that teacher communication and motivation for learning really plummeted last spring. And we have many more detailed statistics and stories in our summary report, which you can find on the Kentucky Student Voice Team's website. And I can also get the link to that and put it in the chat afterwards. And then you can also find them in a multitude of news articles within and also well beyond Kentucky. And the reason for that, and this goes very closely with communications, is that we have since shared the Kentucky student voices from our studies with legislators, superintendents, education advocates, education researchers, mental health professionals, teachers, parents, and students in Kentucky and across the country. we believe that supporting students as serious education research partners so that they can ask the questions that need to be asked is really just one more critical way to unleash student voice to co-create a more just education system. And so just to update on where we are now, so you can see in this part 2 with interviews, we had 30 plus peer-to-peer interviews. So we had a phase 1 of interviewing, and we got 32 peer-to-peer interviews. We did a lot of analysis of those interviews, and now we're actually starting a phase 2 interviews. And so we are just reaching out to Kentucky students who filled out the survey. We drafted a whole new set of questions. Currently, we're getting approval from the IRB board, so that is taking a little bit of time. But yeah, and that's what we're going to be doing this kind of next month. So that's a really big deal, and we're really excited about that. And with what Sadie mentioned about the head and the heart, that's really something we emphasized when we were presenting this Coping with COVID study, because we thought it was super important that we were presenting those statistics and that data, but really students are people too. And students have, there's so many aspects beyond education that we also like to emphasize, such as home environment. And so that was a big part of our presentations. And so now just to talk a little bit more closely about communications, and Sadie, you were super involved with this as well, so I'll give you a chance to add on to anything right when I finish here. But so for survey outreach, which I actually wasn't a part of because I joined once our survey had been disseminated, but we really did a ton through social media. And then our biggest thing was outreach to many partners who were in contact with students. We really tried to get everyone we knew that was able to further spread this survey. And that's really how we got such a large sample and such a diverse sample as well. And then we also sent to some school districts. And so I think Sadie mentioned to me yesterday that in one school district, they sent it out to nearly all of their students, which is really amazing to hear. And then I was a new member during this time, and so another way we did outreach was by encouraging new members to fill out the survey. So that was the first thing I did for Kentucky Student Voice team. And then our presentations were super big for exposure, and since we presented in such a large range of venues, it kind of facilitated more people hearing about this study and then wanting us to present there. So that's really how we got this the word out so much. And then kind of with that, we really tried to maintain the authenticity of student voice when we were sharing back. And so we did that by including direct quotes and statistics, and really, anytime we could just get raw student voice, we were trying to do that. So if you do see one of our Coping with COVID presentations, they have quotes everywhere. And then within our teams themselves, because this was such a big study, and we did all this data analysis and we conducted this basically entirely virtually, it was super important to maintain communication within our group as well. And so this meant constant Zoom calls and meetings. Slack was used constantly. And then we had our teams break up into smaller groups who worked on specific questions or who worked on, either qualitative or quantitative analysis. And so we also had interview analysis groups. And it was just really important that we were able to constantly communicate and be in touch with each other, especially because it was summer, everything was virtual, and we'd never even met each other before. And so those are really some important things I want to highlight in terms of communication. But one other huge aspect of our study that I wanted to bring up was the intergenerational collaboration. So we had adult allies from the University of Kentucky help us. They helped us craft, they specifically with interviews, they helped us craft those questions and submit to the IRB. They also helped us, navigate data analysis. And so I think it's super important to understand that intergenerational collaboration has so many benefits. And once you get to that point where it's adults learning from students as well as students learning from adults, and it's more of a two-way street, then there's really so many possibilities after that. And so, originally I'd been super intimidated because it can be scary to talk to adults who are so qualified, especially when you don't feel qualified yourself as a student with the research you're doing. But now, there's so much I've learned, and there's so much I've learned about how students specifically have what it takes to really spearhead research efforts. And now, Sadie, if there's anything you want to add on, I'll pass it over to you.
No, I think once again, you really covered it in depth. Yeah, I think the Coping with COVID student-to-student survey was one of our sort of most formal outreach and communications processes. We had definitely never worked with an IRB before in order to, conduct roundtable interviews and that sort of thing. But yeah, Spandana, you summarized it really well. And with that, I'll just open it up to any questions, I think, if anyone has anything they want to ask.
I do, but I don't want to be jumping in to go first. If someone else, be glad to yield the floor.
Well, Charlie, let me say that if there is anybody in the audience that wants to ask a question, you may unmute yourself and ask the question personally, or you may certainly type it into chat. I am monitoring the chat, and we will give you the first opportunities to go ahead and ask. Okay,
you can tell by looking at me that I am old school. I'm 60, I'm old, fat, and bald, and glasses, the whole bit. So you can tell that I'm old school. But the way I feel is that I'm not. And I think that anybody that maybe is in my age group might say, no, I don't feel that I am. And so you are new at this, relatively speaking, middle school, notwithstanding Sadie. But I guess what I want to say is that we all feel like we have brought something to the pie. We brought something to the table, and what we have brought is still valid, we hope. I like what you said about we don't come with this with any rules. We don't have our own AP style guide. I'm a fan of no Oxford comma myself. I don't know if that applies today. I like somebody had said to me earlier on that, and this was from somebody that I considered old school, and I'm wondering if it still applies. When you tell a story, tell the story. And when you're done telling a story, shut up. Stop writing. Close your mouth. Does that still apply? And do you think that it's going to be accepted, your newer style of communication? Will it blend with those that are still somewhat old school as you go into the career world?
Yeah, I think I can take a stab at that one. I mean, I've heard it said that what you might call old school is just the fact of sort of every generation having its own communications platform. I mean, not to oversimplify things, but I think the vast majority of my friends and people in my generation Z are on Instagram. I rarely use Twitter, which I think is the millennial platform of choice. And I've heard that, Gen X and above is pretty familiar with Facebook, although I'll say I'm definitely not a Facebook expert. So, I mean, I think in that sense, there are all these new communications platforms, and I guess they're old school in the sense that some generations are older, but I also think there's just the natural evolution of different age groups having their own spaces to communicate and interact with each other. On the note of sort of our not having rules or a formal style guide, I think part of that happens because, we're young and we're a new generation and we don't care for the rules. But I also think a lot of that is really part of the student voice team culture. I know I was also part of my high school's newspaper, PLD Lamplighter, and we definitely had a formal style guide there. We tried our best to adhere to AP style. We followed all the rules when it came to publishing things. And that was because we were really trying to be a very formal publication operating very professionally at the high school level. Whereas the Student Voice Forum, while we tried to really publish high quality pieces that are, very polished and that are accessible to a wide audience, we also really focus more deeply on making sure that students of all backgrounds and experience levels can participate and sort of share whatever story they want to. So I think that sort of lack of emphasis on the rules comes more from our focus as an organization than from our perspective as an entire generation, maybe. Spandana, is there anything you want to add?
No, I mean, you really hit on everything there, Sadie. I think just a big point of really involving students who are least heard is trying to not make our work and involvement with us intimidating. And so students who maybe don't feel super comfortable writing in super professional in using, more complex terminology, we don't want to discourage them from, expressing their ideas and opinions. And so I think that's a big reason also of why we try and do this, just because we think it'll help incentivize students to feel more comfortable being a part of our blog and sharing their stories as well. And I do see a question in the chat about describing Slack and how it is similar to or different from other communication channels. So I can start off with this. But yeah, Slack it's our primary mode of communication, like I said. Basically, the general idea is that you have like all these channels, and so different programs can have different channels, kind of like group chats almost. And that's where we facilitate meetings and anything for that specific program. And then, within that, you can also do private messages. And so you can DM anyone you're working with closely. And that's a really great feature, just because we're all working simultaneously on so many different things. And so it's really nice to just be able to have a quick way to message people. And so we're all pretty active on Slack, just because it is like basically our only platform of communication, really. And so we're constantly using it. And then, there's little things like community building things that we can do on Slack. And it's just like, if someone gets an award and we put it in a general channel, and then everyone can react with like fun emojis and like little celebration things. And it's just our little way of showing support for everyone and what they're doing. And then Sadie, is there anything you kind of want to add on there?
No, I think that's a really good description. I mean, really, we just like Slack because within the broader workspace of the Kentucky Student Voice team, we can subdivide our work into as many channels as possible. So I know a lot of other student-led organizations use things like GroupMe or WhatsApp or other sort of text messaging apps. And that means that either you have to have like 50 different chats for your 50 different committees, or you just have to have all 100 people talking at once in the same area, and it gets very disorganized very quickly. So Slack is a really nice way to make sure that we're all sort of in the same place, but be able to keep things very organized. And it is, as Spandana said, a great way to combine sort of the professional, where we get to have these formal conversations about when we're meeting and what we're going to do next, with more private or low-key discussions where we can send each other DMs, or we can just, use positive emojis to uplift each other, that sort of thing.
I have another question here. Sadie, I was reading in what your write-up for the scholarship, and to pick a line out of it is there are several things here that were reinforcing your dedication to returning to Kentucky this after Yale or a career wherever it may lead you, but to come back home after college and continue to cover the local news. So we know local news with the Herald Leader. If you're talking of Lexington, or maybe that's Louisville or Cincinnati, I don't know, maybe it's a general area, maybe it is here in your hometown. But what I'm curious about, we have the local media that we all know, radio, TV, the Herald Leader, what it may be, Tops and Lex. What do you foresee a few years down the road? See anything different, see anything changing, or that your new ideas will benefit?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not the first to say that the state of local journalism is pretty miserable right now. Obviously, the Courier Journal and the Herald Leader and all sorts of publications do great work, but also from an economic perspective, lots of local newspapers are closing. And while I hope that both of them hold on a little longer, who's to say whether that will happen? So I do think in that sense, there may be negative changes coming, just thinking about how things have been going for the past few decades. That being said, I do think there's been some really innovative new approaches to journalism. One thing that comes to mind particularly, there's this organization in Lexington called Civic Lex, which isn't necessarily a traditional, journalistic publication, but which focuses really intently on local government. So they publish newsletters about what all of the different committees and city council are doing. They host budgeting forums and other ways for people to really get involved with their local government. They do surveys, they do presentations to the council, they do all sorts of stuff. And I think that's a really unique approach that's focused on informing the community without necessarily using the traditional mode of journalism. And I think they've been able to see a lot of success because they're approaching it from a nonprofit perspective as opposed to a for-profit journalism perspective. So obviously, I'm 17, I've still got many years to go until I settle into a professional career. But I do think while the state of traditional local journalism is sort of despairing and hopefully gets revitalized in the coming years, I also think there's a whole lot of innovation coming out that makes me hopeful for how we'll develop new ways to interact with each other and inform each other about what's going on in the community.
I don't know. What do you think? What's your thoughts for the future of where is hometown for you? And is that kind of what your thoughts are, to go back and better what you grew up with?
Sorry, it looks like my Wi-Fi cut out there for a second. Could you repeat what you just said?
I was just curious, what are your thoughts after college to bring some of the skills that you have now and polish them in college and take them back to wherever you may choose to build a career? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've been super involved with like STEM classes, and that's kind of what my focus has been in school. And so when I think about all the work I do with Student Voice Team, sometimes they're very different fields and very different work, but I think definitely it's something that I want to make sure I'm pursuing regardless. And I think now that I understand as a student what I need from adults in adult-led spaces, how I need to feel heard, I think, when I go older, I want to make sure I'm being also that type of person who can uplift student voice. And also just thinking.
She's right.
Uh-oh, I think we lost somebody.
Connection.
Yes, well, we'll wait for her to come back. I did have a question while we are waiting for her. Mine is, I'm more of an IT person. I like that kind of type thing. Your survey sounds super impressive. How many students was the survey open to? Do you know that? Like how many total in the state of Kentucky? Because the number 10,000 seems like a huge number of getting them back. And then the second part, what kind of platform did you use for that survey?
It was an online survey hosted on SurveyMonkey, so that was accessible to really anyone. And there were no sort of formal restrictions on who could take it. At the very beginning, there was a question like, are you a Kentucky student, essentially? And so people who weren't from Kentucky weren't able to finish the rest of the questions. But other than that, it was really open to anyone in Kentucky, grades 6 through 12, from any county, any location. And then on the back end, once we had gotten all of our responses, we cleaned out all the responses from people who were from elementary school or results which were clearly, parents answering for their children, that sort of thing. And then on the note of sort of the number of responses, we really did, as Spandana mentioned, do a lot of personal outreach through social media, a lot of reaching out to people that we knew who we thought had some connection to students. And so we initially got, I believe, 13,000 people who just clicked on the survey or opened it or answered a few questions. And then once we had cleaned out everything that was unusable or empty, we had nearly 10,000 usable responses, I believe.
That is awfully impressive. I do a lot of surveys, and it is really hard to get people to answer questions. It seems so simple and so easy. it's really, really hard. So that's pretty impressive. Spandana, did you want to continue? We lost you for a second. I know you were in the middle of something. If you want it back, go for it.
Well, okay, I don't know how much you guys heard, and my Wi-Fi cuts out a lot. But yeah, I mean, I think the main thing that is when I like go off to college and, you know, pursue whatever career I plan on doing, I really want to make sure that in whatever I'm doing, I'm still having an opportunity to connect with students, to connect with youth, and make sure that I'm uplifting student voice the same way that a lot of our adult allies have done for me. And so I think, you know, with that, the Kentucky Student Voice team, we have a lot of our alumni and like a lot of, you know, of our members who went off to college still be really a part of our work. And I think the two that come most to mind are Andrew Brennan and Hyatt Allen, who really like founded and just led so much with the Student Voice team. And now they're still really involved. They still help us so much. And so that's kind of what I plan on doing and how I plan on giving back even when I like move off to college and beyond.
Excellent. Does anybody else have any other questions? It's very impressive. A lot of good stuff you guys are doing. I couldn't handle a lot of this as an adult, let alone as a high school student. So, any last questions from our audience before we turn them loose? Charlie, do you have any last questions? Any other board members have questions?
I think not. I just wish you very well at Yale. That's Hartford, Connecticut, right?
New Haven.
New Haven, Connecticut. Good luck there in the tri-states. Spandana, are you off to college this year, or what's your status?
No, I'm not. I have 2 more years of high school. I'll be a junior.
Well, best of luck to you both. Maybe we'll hear from you again.
This is Natasha.
I have nothing further, but I certainly appreciate a fresh voice. We hear a lot of the same things re-expressed different ways, but it's nice to hear the younger generation because you are the future, and I look forward to it.
Natasha, did you have a question? I saw.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I was just going to tell the young ladies I was really impressed with your presentation and all the work that you have done. That's just wonderful that we've got young people out there doing the type of things that you are doing and being concerned about other students that may not have a voice too as well. So best of luck to both of you, and thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you guys. And I also just want to say like a really big thank you, just because in a lot of like adult facilitated spaces, you know, some people aren't interested in hearing this type of stuff. So I just really want to thank you guys for also doing your part in uplifting student voice. I think it's really great to see.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. Thank you all so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
All right, well, thank you for coming back and visiting us and sharing with us. I will share your PowerPoint if you send me a copy of that. If it's okay, I will put a direct link from our website to your student voice group. I will definitely would love to connect the next year at some time with your group. So if you want to pass our information on to someone, we will obviously we will be doing a scholarship again. So Spandana, you can apply for that in 2 years apparently, but we would love to do that, and then maybe we can partner somewhere down the line on something else. If there's anything you ever need from us, obviously. Feel free to kind of contact any one of us on the board, and we'll see what we can do. So again, everyone join me in thanking. Round of applause. It was a great presentation. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen and talk about our next presentation. Our next Lunch and Learn is going to be August 25th. One of our members, Brian McFarland, is going to join us. He's with Kentucky Public Radio. He's going to give us a nice overview of Kentucky Public Radio, the stations, and demo some data about their 600,000 plus listeners. So that is going to be August 25th. It's going to be at 11:30, just slightly later than today. You can go to our website and add it to your calendar. The link join information is there, and then sometime in the next week you'll start getting some emails about that. So otherwise, thank you for joining us today. Everybody have a great day, and we will see you next month.